Alright, welcome back to The Princess Bride. We last left with Fezzik's backstory, learning about his childhood, and we stopped right after that glimpse in his past, right before his turn to take on the Man in Black. And he was planning to ambush him. And the last line said, if Vizzini told him to do something, Fezzik did it. And if that meant crushing the head of the Man in Black, so be it. But not by ambush. Not the coward's way. Nothing unsportsmanlike. His parents had always taught him to go by the rules. Fezzik stood in shadow, the great rock tight in his great hand. He could hear the footsteps of the Man in Black coming nearer, nearer. Fezzik leaped from hiding, and threw the rock with incredible power and perfect accuracy. It smashed into a boulder a foot away from the face of the Man in Black. I did that on purpose, Fezzik said then, picking up another rock, holding it steady. I did not to miss. I believe you, the Man in Black said. They stood facing each other on the narrow mountain path. Now what happens? Asked the Man in Black. We face each other as God intended, Fezzik said. No tricks, no weapons. Skill against skill alone. You mean you'll put down your rock, and I'll put down my sword, and we'll try to kill each other like civilized people, is that it? If you'd rather, I can kill you now, Fezzik said gently, and he raised the rock to throw. I am giving you a chance. So you are, and I accept it, said the Man in Black, and he began to take off his sword and scabbard. Although, frankly, I think the odds are slightly in your favor at hand fighting. I tell you what I tell everybody, Fezzik explained. I cannot help being the biggest and strongest. It's not my fault. I'm not blaming you, said the Man in Black. Let's get to it then, Fezzik said, and he dropped his rock and got into fighting position, watching as the Man in Black slowly moved toward him. For a moment, Fezzik felt almost wistful. This was clearly a good fellow, even if he had killed an ego. He didn't complain or try to beg or bribe. He just accepted his fate. No complaining, nothing like that. Obviously a criminal of character. Was he a criminal, though, Fezzik wondered? Surely the mask would indicate that. Or was it worse than that? Was he disfigured? His face burned away by acid, perhaps? Or perhaps born hideous? Why do you wear a mask and hood? Fezzik asked. I think everybody will in the near future, was the Man in Black's reply. They're terribly comfortable. They faced each other on the mountain path. There was a moment's pause. Then they engaged. Fezzik let the Man in Black fiddle around for a bit, tested the man's strength, which was considerable for someone who wasn't a giant. He let the Man in Black feint and dodge and try a hold here or hold there. Then, when he was quite sure the Man in Black would not go to his maker embarrassed, Fezzik locked his arms tight around. Fezzik lifted and squeezed. And squeezed. Then he took the remains of the Man in Black, snapped him one way, snapped him the other, cracked him with one hand in the neck, with the other at the spine base, locked his legs up, rolled his limp arms around them, and tossed the entire bundle of what had once been human into a nearby crevice. That was the theory, anyway. In fact, what happened was this. Fezzik lifted and squeezed, and the Man in Black slipped free. Thought Fezzik. That certainly was a surprise. I thought for sure I had him. You're very quick, Fezzik complimented. And a good thing, too, said the Man in Black. Then they engaged again. This time Fezzik did not give the Man in Black a chance to fiddle. He just grabbed him, swung him around his head once, twice, smashed his skull against the nearest boulder, pounded him, pummeled him, gave him a final squeeze for good measure, and tossed the remains of what had once been alive into a nearby crevice. Those were his intentions, anyway. In actuality, he never even got through the grabbing part with much success, because no sooner had Fezzik's great hands reached out than the Man in Black dropped and spun and twisted and was loose and free and still quite alive. I don't understand the thing that's happening, Fezzik thought. Could I be losing my strength? Could there be a mountain disease that takes your strength? There was a desert disease that took my parents' strength. That must be it. I must have caught a plague. But if that is it, why isn't he weak? No, I must still be strong. or it has to be something else. Now what could it be? Suddenly he knew. He had not fought against one man in so long he had all but forgotten how. He had been fighting groups and gangs and bunches for so many years that the idea of having but a single opponent was slow in making itself known to him. Because you fought them entirely differently. When there were 12 against you, you made certain moves, tried certain holds, acted in certain ways. When there was but one, you had to completely readjust yourself. Quickly now, Fezzik went back through time. How had he fought the champion of Sandiki? He flashed through the fight in his mind, then reminded himself of all the other victories against other champions, the men from Ispir, and Simal, and Bolu, and Zile. He remembered fleeing Constantinople because he had beaten their champion so quickly, so easily. Yes, Fezzik thought, of course. And suddenly, he readjusted his style to what it once had been. But by that time, the man in black had him by the throat. The man in black was riding him, and his arms were locked across Fezzik's windpipe, one in front, one behind. Fezzik reached back, but the man in black was hard to grasp. Fezzik could not get his arms around to his back and dislodge the enemy. Fezzik ran at a boulder, and at the last moment spun around, so the man in black received the main force of the charge. It was a terrible jolt. Fezzik knew it was, but the grip on his windpipe grew ever tighter. Fezzik charged the boulder again spun. Again he knew the power of the blow the man in black had taken, but still the grip remained. Fezzik clawed at the man in black's arms. He pounded his giant fists against them. By now, he had no air. Fezzik continued to struggle. He could feel a hollowness in his legs now. He could see the world beginning to pale. But he did not give up. He was the mighty Fezzik, lover of rhymes, and you did not give up, no matter what. Now the hollowness was in his arms, and the world was snowing. Fezzik went to his knees. He pounded still, but feebly. He fought still, but his blows would not have harmed a child. No air. There was no more air. There was no more anything, not for Fezzik, not in this world. I am beaten. I am going to die, he thought, just before he fell onto the mountain path. He was only half wrong. There was an instant between unconsciousness and death, and as the giant pitched onto the rocky path, that instant happened, and just before it happened, the man in black let go. He staggered to his feet and leaned against a boulder until he could walk. Fezzik lay sprawled, faintly breathing. The man in black looked around for a rope to secure the giant, gave up the search almost as soon as he'd begun. What good were ropes against strength like this? He would simply snap them. The man in black made his way back to where he dropped his sword. He put it back on. 2 down. And the hardest, 1 to go. Vizzini was waiting for him. Indeed, he had set out a little picnic spread. From the knapsack that he always carried, he had taken a small handkerchief, and on it he had placed 2 wine goblets. In the center was a small leather wine holder, and beside it, some cheese and some apples. The spot could not have been lovelier. A high point in the mountain path with a splendid view all the way back to Florin Channel. Buttercup lay helpless beside the picnic, gagged and tied and blindfolded. Vizzini held his long knife against her white throat. "Welcome!" Vizzini called when the man in black was almost upon them. The man in black stopped and surveyed the situation. "You've beaten my Turk," Vizzini said. "It would seem so." "And now it is down to you. And it is down to me." "So that would seem too," the man in black said, edging just a half step closer to the hunchback's long knife. With a smile, the hunchback pushed the knife harder against Buttercup's throat. It was about to bring blood. "If you wish her dead, by all means, keep moving," Vizzini said. The man in black froze. "Better," Vizzini nodded. No sound now beneath the moonlight. "I understand completely what you are trying to do," the Sicilian said finally. "And I want it quite clear that I resent your behavior. You are trying to kidnap what I have rightfully stolen, and I think it quite ungentlemanly." "Let me explain," the man in black began, starting to edge forward. "You're killing her!" the Sicilian screamed, shoving harder with the knife. A drop of blood appeared now at Buttercup's throat, red against white. The man in black retreated. "Let me explain," he said again, but from a distance. Again, the hunchback interrupted. "There is nothing you can tell me I do not already know. I have not had the schooling equal to some, but for knowledge outside of books, there is no one in the world close to me.
People say I can read minds, but that is not, in all honesty, true. I merely predict the truth using logic and wisdom, and I say you are a kidnapper. Admit it.
I will admit that. As a ransom item, she has value, nothing more.
I have been instructed to do certain things to her. It is very important that I follow my instructions. If I do this properly, I will be in demand for life, and my instructions do not include ransom. They include death. So your explanations are meaningless. We cannot do business together. You wish to keep her alive for ransom, whereas it is terribly important for me that she stop breathing in the very near future.
Has it occurred to you that I have gone to great effort and expense, as well as personal sacrifice, to reach this point? The man in black replied. And that if I fail now, I might get very angry. And if she stops breathing in the very near future, it is entirely possible that you will catch the same fatal illness.
I have no doubt that you could kill me. Any man who can get by Inigo and Fezzik would have no trouble disposing of me. However, has it occurred to you that if you did that, neither of us would get what we want? You having lost your ransom item, me, my life.
We are at an impasse then, said the man in black.
I fear so, said the Sicilian. I cannot compete with you physically, and you are no match for my brains.
You are that smart.
There are no words to contain all my wisdom. I am so cunning, crafty, and clever, so filled with deceit, guile, and chicanery, such a knave, so shrewd, cagey, as well as calculating, as diabolical as I am vulpine, as tricky as I am untrustworthy. Well, I told you there were no words invented yet to explain how great my brain is, but let me put it this way. The world is several million years old, and several billion people have at one time or another trod upon it. But I, Vizzini the Sicilian, am speaking with pure candor and modesty, the slickest, sleekest, slyest, and wiliest fellow has yet come down the pike.
In that case, said the man in black, I challenge you to a battle of wits. Vizzini had to smile.
For the princess.
You read my mind.
It just seems that way I told you. It's merely logic and wisdom. To the death?
Correct again.
I accept, cried Vizzini. Begin the battle.
Pour the wine, said the man in black. Vizzini filled the 2 goblets with deep red liquid. The man in black pulled from his dark clothing a small packet and handed it to the hunchback. Open it and inhale, but be careful not to touch. Vizzini took the packet and followed the instructions.
I smell nothing.
The man in black took the packet back again. What you do not smell is called iocane powder. It is odorless, tasteless, and dissolves immediately in any kind of liquid. It also happens to be the deadliest poison known to man. Vizzini was beginning to get excited. I don't suppose you'd hand me the goblets, said the man in black. Vizzini shook his head.
Take them yourself. My long knife does not leave her throat.
The man in black reached down for the goblets. He took them and turned away. Vizzini cackled aloud in anticipation. The man in black busied himself a long moment. Then he turned again with a goblet in each hand. Very carefully, he put the goblet in his right hand in front of Vizzini and put the goblet in his left hand across the kerchief from the hunchback. He sat down in front of the left-hand goblet and dropped the empty iocane packet by the cheese. Your guess, he said. Where is the poison?
Guess? Vizzini cried. I don't guess. I think, I ponder, I deduce, then I decide. But I never guess.
The battle of wits has begun, the man in black said. It ends when you decide and we drink the wine and find out who is right and who is dead. We both drink, need I add, and swallow, naturally, at precisely the same time.
It's all so simple, said the hunchback. All I have to do is deduce, from what I know of you, the way your mind works. Are you the kind of man who would put the poison into your own glass, or into the glass of his enemy?
You're stalling, said the man in black.
I'm relishing what I'm doing, answered the Sicilian. No one has challenged my mind in years, and I love it. By the way, may I smell both the goblets?
Be my guest. Just be sure you put them down the same way you found them. The Sicilian sniffed his own glass. Then he reached across the kerchief for the goblet of the man in black and sniffed that.
As you said, odorless. As I also said, you're stalling.
The Sicilian smiled and stared at the wine goblets.
Now a great fool, he began, would place the poison in his own goblet, because he would know that only another great fool would reach first for what he was given. I am clearly not a great fool, so I will clearly not reach for your wine.
That's your final choice?
No, because you knew I was not a great fool, so you would know that I would never fall for such a trick. You would count on it, so I will clearly not reach for mine either.
Keep going, said the man in black.
I intend to, the Sicilian reflected a moment. We have now decided this poison cup is most likely in front of you, but the poison is powder made from iocane. And iocane comes only from Australia. And Australia, as everyone knows, is peopled with criminals. And criminals are used to having people not trust them. And I don't trust you, which means I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you.
The man in black was starting to get nervous.
But again, you must have suspected I knew the origins of iocane, so you would have known I knew about the criminals and criminal behavior, and therefore I cannot choose the wine in front of me.
Truly, you have a dizzying intellect, whispered the man in black.
You have beaten my Turk, which means you are exceptionally strong, and exceptionally strong men are convinced that they are too powerful ever to die. Too powerful even for iocane poison. So, you could have put it in your cup trusting on your strength to save you. Thus, I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you.
The man in black was very nervous now.
But you also bested my Spaniard, which means you must have studied, because he studied many years for his excellence, and if you can study, you are clearly more than simply strong. You are aware of how immortal we all are, and you do not wish to die, so you would have kept the poison as far from yourself as possible. Therefore, I cannot clearly choose the wine in front of me.
You're just trying to make me give something away with all this chatter, said the man in black angrily. Well, it won't work. You'll learn nothing from me, that I promise you.
I've already learned everything from you, said the Sicilian. I know where the poison is.
Only a genius could have deduced as much.
How fortunate for me that I happen to be one,
said the hunchback, growing more and more amused now. You cannot frighten me, said the man in black, but there was fear all through his voice.
Shall we drink then?
Pick, choose, quit dragging it out. You don't know. You couldn't know. The Sicilian only smiled at the outburst. Then a strange look crossed his features, and he pointed off behind the man in black.
What in the world can that be? He asked.
The man in black turned around and looked. I don't see anything.
Oh, well, I could have sworn I saw something. No matter.
The Sicilian began to laugh. I don't understand what's so funny, said the man in black.
Tell you in a minute, said the hunchback. But first, let's drink.
And he picked up his own wine goblet. The man in black picked up the one in front of him. They drank. You guessed wrong, said the man in black.
You only think I guessed wrong, said the Sicilian, his laughter ringing louder. That's what's so funny. I switched glasses when your back was turned.
There was nothing for the man in black to say.
Fool, cried the hunchback. You fell victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is never get involved in a land war in Asia, but only slightly less well known is this. Never going against a Sicilian when death is on the line.
He was quite cheery until the iocane powder took effect. The man in black stepped quickly over the corpse, then roughly ripped the blindfold from the princess's eyes. I heard everything that Buttercup began, and then she said, oh, because she had never been next to a dead man before. You killed him, she whispered finally. I let him die laughing, said the man in black. Pray I do as much for you. He lifted her, slashed her bonds away, put her on her feet, started to pull her along. Please, Buttercup said. Give me a moment to gather myself. The man in black released his grip. Buttercup rubbed her wrist, stopped, massaged her ankles. She took a final look at the Sicilian. To think, she murmured. All that time it was your cup that was poisoned. They were both poisoned, said the man in black. I spent the past 2 years building up immunity to iocane powder. Buttercup looked up at him. He was terrifying to her, masked and hooded and dangerous. His voice was strained, rough. Who are you? She asked. I am no one to be trifled with, replied the man in black. That is all you ever need to know. And with that, he yanked her upright. You've had your moment. Again, he pulled her after him, and this time she could do nothing but follow. They moved along the mountain path. The moonlight was very bright, and there were rocks everywhere, and to Buttercup it all looked dead and yellow like the moon. She had just spent several hours with 3 men who were openly planning to kill her. So why, she wondered, was she more frightened now than then? Who was the horrid hooded figure to strike fear in her so? What could be worse than dying? "I will pay you a great deal of money to release me," she managed to say. The man in black glanced at her. "You're rich, then?" "I will be," Buttercup said. "Whatever you want for ransom, I promise I'll get it for you if you let me go." The man in black just laughed. "I was not speaking in jest." "You promise? You? I should release you on your promise? What is that worth? The vow of a woman? Oh, that is very funny, Highness. Spoken in jest or not." They proceeded along the mountain path to an open space. The man in black stopped then. There were a million stars fighting for prominence, and for a moment he seemed to be intent on nothing less than studying them all, as Buttercup watched his eyes flick from constellation to constellation behind his mask. Then, with no warning, he spun off the path, heading into wild terrain, pulling her behind him. She stumbled. He pulled her to her feet. Again she fell. Again he righted her. "I cannot move this quickly." "You can and you will, or you will suffer greatly. Do you think I could make you suffer greatly?" Buttercup nodded. "Then run!" cried the man in black, and he broke into a run himself, flying across rocks into the moonlight, pulling the princess behind him. She did her best to keep up. She was frightened as to what he would do to her, so she dared not fall again. After 5 minutes, the man in black stopped dead. "Catch your breath," he commanded. Buttercup nodded, gasped in the air, tried to quiet her heart. But then they were off again, with no warning, dashing across the mountainous terrain, heading. "Where do you take me?" Buttercup gasped, when he again gave her a chance to rest. "Surely even someone as arrogant as you cannot expect me to give an answer." "It does not matter if you tell or not. He will find you." "He, Highness?" "Prince Humperdinck. There's no greater hunter. He can track a falcon on a cloudy day. He can find you." "You have confidence that your dearest love will save you, do you?" "I never said he was my dearest love. And yes, he will save me. That I know." "You must admit you do not love your husband. You admit you do not love your husband-to-be? Fancy, an honest woman. You're a rare specimen, Highness." "The prince and I have never from the beginning lied to each other. He knows I do not love him." "Are you not capable of love? Is that what you mean?" "I'm very capable of love," Buttercup said. "Hold your tongue, I think. I have loved more deeply than a killer like you can possibly imagine." He slapped her. "That is a penalty for lying, Highness. Where I come from, when a woman lies, she is reprimanded." "But I spoke the truth. Buttercup saw his hand rise a second time, so she stopped quickly, fell dead silent. Then they began to run again. They did not speak for hours. They just ran, and then, as if he could guess when she was spent, he would stop, release her hand. She would try to catch her breath for the next dash she was sure would come. Without a sound, he would grab her, and off they would go. It was close to dawn when they first saw the armada. They were running along the edge of a towering ravine. They seemed almost to be at the top of the world. When they stopped, Buttercup sank down to rest. The man in black stood silently over her. "Your love comes, not alone," he said then. Buttercup did not understand. The man in black pointed back the way they had come. Buttercup stared as she did, the waters of Florin Channel seemed as filled with light as the sky was filled with stars. "You must have ordered every ship in Florin after you," the man in black said. "Such a sight I have never seen." He stared at all the lanterns on all the ships as they moved. "You can never escape him," Buttercup said. "If you release me, I promise that you will come to no harm." "You are much too generous. I could never accept such an offer." "I offered you your life. That was generous enough." "Highness," said the man in black, and his hands were suddenly at her throat. "If there is talk of life to be done, let me do it." "You would not kill me. You did not steal me from the murderers to murder me yourself." "Wise as well as loving," said the man in black. He jerked her to her feet, and they ran along the edge of the great ravine. It was hundreds of feet deep, filled with rocks and trees and lifting shadows. Abruptly, the man in black stopped, stared back at the armada. "To be honest," he said, "I had not expected quite so many. You can never predict my prince. That is why he is the greatest hunter." "I wonder," said the man in black, "will he stay in one group or will he divide? Some to search the coastline, some to follow your path on land. What do you think?" "I only know he will find me. And if you have not given me my freedom first, he will not treat you gently." "Surely I must have discussed things with you. The thrill of the hunt. What has he done in the past with many ships? We do not discuss hunting. That I can assure you. Not hunting, not love. What do you talk about? We do not see all that much of each other. Tender couple. Buttercup could feel the upset coming. We are always very honest with each other. Not everyone can say as much. May I please tell you something, Highness? You're very cold. I'm not very cold and very young, and if you live, I think you'll turn to hoarfrost. Why do you pick at me? I have come to terms with my life, and that is my affair. I am not cold, I swear, but I have decided certain things, and it is best for me to ignore emotion. I have not been happy dealing with it. Her heart was a secret garden, and the walls were very high. I loved once, Buttercup said after a moment. It worked out badly. Another rich man? Yes, and he left you for a richer woman. No, poor. Poor, and it killed him. Were you sorry? Did you feel pain? Admit that you felt nothing. Do not mock my grief. I died that day. The Armada began to fire signal cannons. The explosion echoed through the mountains. The man in black stared at the ships, began to change formation. And while he was watching the ships, Buttercup shoved him with all her strength remaining. For a moment, the man in black teetered at the ravine edge. His arms spun like windmills, fighting for balance. They swung and gripped the air, and then he began his slide. Down went the man in black, stumbling and torn and reaching out to stop his descent, but the ravine was too steep, and nothing could be done. Down, down, rolling over rocks, spinning, out of all control. Buttercup stared at what she had done. Finally, he rested far below her, silent and without motion. You can die too for all I care, she said, and then she turned away. Words followed her, whispered from far, weak and warm and familiar. As you wish. Dawn in the mountains. Buttercup turned back to the source of the sound and stared down as, in first light, the man in black struggled to remove his mask. Oh, my sweet Wesley, Buttercup said. What have I done to you now? From the bottom of the ravine there came only silence. Buttercup hesitated not a moment. Down she went after him, keeping her feet as best she could, and as she began, she thought she heard him crying out to her over and over, but she could not make sense of his words, because inside her now there was the thunder of walls crumbling, and that was noise enough. Besides, her balance quickly was gone, and the ravine had her. She fell fast, and she fell hard. But what did that matter, since she would have gladly dropped 1,000 feet onto a bed of nails if Wesley had been waiting at the bottom. Down, down. Tossed and spinning, crashing, torn out of all control, she rolled and twisted and plunged, cartwheeling toward what was left of her beloved. From his position at the point of the Armada, Prince Humperdinck stared up at the cliffs of insanity. This was just like any other hunt. He made himself think away the quarry. It did not matter if you were after an antelope or a bride-to-be. The procedures held. You gathered evidence, then you acted. You studied, then you performed. If you studied too little, the chances were strong that your actions would also be too late. You had to take time. And so, frozen in thought, he continued to stare up the sheer face of the cliffs. Obviously, someone had recently climbed them. There were foot scratchings all the way up a straight line, which meant most certainly a rope, an arm-over-arm climb of 1,000-foot rope with occasional foot kicks for balance. To make such a climb required both strength and planning, so the prince made those marks in his brain. My enemy is strong. My enemy is not impulsive. Now his eyes reached a point perhaps 300 feet from the top. Here it began to get interesting. Now the foot scratchings were deeper, more frequent, and they followed no direct ascending line. Either someone left the rope 300 feet from the top intentionally, which made no sense, or the rope was cut while that someone was still 300 feet from safety. For clearly, this last part of the climb was made up the rock face itself. But who had such talent? And why had he been called to exercise it at such a deadly time, 700 feet above disaster? I must examine the tops of the cliffs of insanity, the prince said, without bothering to turn. From behind him, Count Rugen only said, Done, and awaited further instructions.
Send off the armada south along the coastline, the other north. They should meet by twilight near the fire swamp. Our ship will sail to the first landing possibility, and you will follow me with your soldiers. Ready the whites!" Count Rugen signaled the cannoneer, and the prince's instructions boomed along the cliffs. Within minutes, the armada had begun to split, with only the prince's giant ship sailing alone closest to the coastline, looking for a landing possibility. "There!" the prince ordered. Some time later, and his ship began maneuvering into the cove for a safe place to anchor. That took time, but not much, because the captain was skilled, and, more than that, the prince was quick to lose patience, and no one dared risk that. Humperdinck jumped from the ship to shore, a plank was lowered, and the whites were led to ground. Of all his accomplishments, none pleased the prince as did these horses. Some day he would have an army of them, but getting the bloodlines perfect was a slow business. He now had 4 whites, and they were identical. Snowy, tireless giants. 20 hands high. On flat land nothing could catch them, and even on hills and rocky terrain there was nothing short of Araby close to their equal. The prince, when rushed, rode all 4, bareback, the only way he ever rode, riding 1, leading 3, changing beasts in mid-stride so that no single animal had to bear his bulk to the tiring point. Now he mounted and was gone. It took him considerably less than an hour to reach the edge of the cliffs of Insanity. He dismounted, went to his knees, commenced his study of the terrain. There had been a rope tied around a giant oak. The bark at the base was broken and scraped, so probably whoever first reached the top untied the rope, and whoever was on the rope at that moment was 300 feet from the peak, and somehow survived the climb. A great jumble of footprints caused him trouble. It was hard to ascertain what had gone on. Perhaps a conference, because 2 sets of footprints seemed to lead off while 1 remained pacing the cliff edge. Then there were 2 on the cliff edge. Humperdinck examined the prince until he was certain of 2 things. 1. A fencing match had taken place. 2. The combatants were both masters. The stride length, the quickness of the foot feints, all clearly revealed to his unfailing eye, made him reassess his second conclusion. They were at least masters. Probably better. Then he closed his eyes and concentrated on smelling out the blood. Surely, in a match of such ferocity, blood must have been spilled. Now it was a matter of giving his entire body over to his sense of smell. The prince had worked at this for many years. Ever since a wounded tigress had surprised him from a tree limb while he was tracking her, he had let his eyes follow the blood hunt then, and it had almost killed him. Now he trusted only his olfactories. If there was blood within 100 yards, he would find it. He opened his eyes, moved without hesitation toward a group of large boulders until he found the blood drops. There were a few of them, and they were dry, but less than 3 hours old. Humperdinck smiled. When you had the whites under you, 3 hours was a finger snap. He retraced the duel then, for it confused him. It seemed to range from cliff edge and back, then returned to the cliff edge, and sometimes the left foot seemed to be leading, sometimes the right, which made no logical sense at all. Clearly, swordsmen were changing hands, but why would a master do that unless his good arm was wounded to the point of uselessness? And that clearly had not happened, because a wound of that depth would have left blood spores, and there was simply not enough blood in the area to indicate that. Strange. Strange. Humperdinck continued his wanderings. Stranger still, the battle could not have ended in death. He knelt by the outline of a body. Clearly, a man had lain unconscious here, but again, no blood. "There was a mighty duel," Prince Humperdinck said, directing his comment toward Count Rugen, who had finally caught up, together with a contingent of 100 mounted men-at-arms. "My guess would be," and for a moment the prince paused, following footsteps, "would be that whoever fell here ran off there," and he pointed one way, "and that whoever was the victor ran off along the mountain path in almost precisely the opposite direction. It is also my opinion that the victor was following the path taken by the princess." "Shall we follow them both?" the count asked. "I think not," Prince Humperdinck replied. "Whoever is gone is of minimal importance, since whoever has the princess is the whoever we're after, and because we don't know the nature of the trap we might be being led into, we might need all the arms we have in one band. Clearly, this has been planned by the countrymen of Gilder, and nothing must ever be put past them." "You think this is a trap, then?" the count asked.
I always think everything is a trap until proven otherwise, the prince answered, which is why I'm still alive. And with that, he was back aboard a white and galloping. When he reached the mountain path where the hand fight happened, the prince did not even bother dismounting. Everything that could be seen was quite visible from horseback. Someone has beaten a giant, he said when the count was close enough. The giant has run away, do you see? The count, of course, saw nothing but rock and mountain path. I would not think to doubt you. And look there, cried the prince, because now he saw for the first time, in the rubble of the mountain path, the footsteps of a woman. The princess is alive! And again the whites were thundering across the mountain. When the count caught up with him again, the prince was kneeling over the still body of a hunchback. The count dismounted. Smell this, the prince said, and he handed up a goblet. Nothing, said the count. No odor at all. Iocane, the prince replied. I would bet my life on it. I know of nothing else that kills so silently. He stood up then. The princess was still alive. Her footprints follow the path, he shouted at the 100 mounted men. There will be great suffering in Gilder if she dies. On foot now, he ran along the mountain path, following the footsteps that he alone could see, and when those footsteps left the path for wilder terrain, he followed still. Strung up behind him, the count and all the soldiers did their best to keep up. Men stumbled, horses fell, even the count tripped from time to time. Prince Humperdinck never even broke stride. He ran steadily, mechanically, his barrel legs pumping like a metronome. It was 2 hours after dawn when he reached the steep ravine. Odd, he said to the count, who was tiring badly. The count continued only to breathe deeply. 2 bodies fell to the bottom, and they did not come back up. That is odd, the count managed. No, that isn't what's odd, the prince corrected. Clearly, the kidnapper did not come back up because the climb was too steep, and our cannons must have let him know that they were closely pursued. His decision, which I applaud, was to make better time running along the ravine floor. The count waited for the prince to continue. It's just odd that a man who is a master fencer, a defeater of giants, an expert in the use of iocane powder, would not know what this ravine opens into. And what is that? Asked the count. The fire swamp, said Prince Humperdinck. Then we have him, said the count. Precisely so. It was a well-documented trait of his to smile only just before the kill. His smile was very much in evidence now. And so next time, we will read of the adventure into the fire swamp.